Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of My JavaScript Story. This week, we're talking to Phil Hawksworth. Phil, do you want to say hi?
Hey, how's it going? Nice to see you, Chuck. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Now, I just want to let people know if you want to hear more from Phil or our friend Divya. They were on episode 347 of JavaScript Jabber. We talked about the JAMstack. And if you stick around devchat.tv long enough, you're actually going to see the fruition of that conversation come to pass, because I am moving my site over to a JAMstack site. So
nice.
devchat.tv will be JAMstack instead of WordPress.
Oh, that makes me happy.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
Yeah. That's something you're working on right now?
Yes, it is. I spend a couple hours every week on it. And I say that very loosely because I've been pretty busy traveling, so it's the weeks I'm not traveling.
Right.
But I think this week or next week, I'm just going to buckle down and get it done.
Awesome.
And get it all moved over. But yeah, I've been using Eleventy JS based on your recommendation.
Oh, I'm a fan of that as well. It's funny. People around the office make fun of me a tiny bit because I go on about it so much, because I feel like I've found my static site generator that just kind of fits me. So I'm using it quite a lot, and I'm quite enthusiastic.
Yeah, it's actually funny. I've had a few people ask me why I'm not using Jekyll, because I've been doing Ruby forever. But
right. Yeah.
I picked it up, and it just everything kind of naturally fell into it. So.
Yeah, and it makes sense for me as well, because I'm more of a JavaScript guy. When it comes to Ruby, I did just enough to be dangerous, but I was always floundering a tiny bit. So no matter how much I loved Jekyll, there was always the slight kind of overhead for me of not really knowing what I was doing with Ruby. So Eleventy kind of fits the bill for me from that point of view, because I don't have to learn another technology, which is nice. Well,
and for the most part, with Eleventy. So my import script's written in Ruby, but the rest of it, I mean, it's mostly config, honestly, that I'm writing in JavaScript. The rest of it's just markup with nunjucks or handlebars or whatever I'm using there. So and it's interesting too, because I'm also using it on Podwrench, which is my podcasting tool that I've been working on forever.
Oh wow! So you're using it in a few places.
Yeah. So the static end of things is all Eleventy, and then the app is written in Rails.
Right.
But yeah, so if you go to app.podwrench.com, then that's all Rails. But if you go to podwrench.com, the blog and everything else there is just going to be a static site that's built off of Eleventy. I'm probably hosted on Netlify when I get around to kicking it up there, but right now I just have a page up there that people can sign up on. But yeah, anyway, so
it sounds like we've ground you down after just a handful of podcasts where you've had people talking about JAMstack, whether it was me and Divya or if it was Gareth talking about JAMstack. You've gradually been ground down to the JAMstack is the way for your site to go.
Well, what really did it, I'll admit, is between you and Christopher and Andy. He was talking about all the pain he didn't have anymore because he switched off of WordPress, and I'm sitting there going, yeah, that sounds like my pain.
I think a lot of people relate to that. You know, it's the old thing of, my site works fine. It's been living for a long time. And now, crumbs, I need to update something on my server because my host is going to deprecate something. So I need to update something. And it's like this chain of things you need to get sorted. I know I've lost work and sites in the past from not having my act together and being able to maintain a LAMPstack server for 6 or 7 years after I deployed something.
Yeah. The other part of it now, though, is that I have a team that writes the show notes and everything else.
Uh-huh.
And so they get in and I'm like, okay, you can touch this and this and nothing else.
Don't touch any of the moving bits. It'll fall apart.
So yeah, it works out well, but it does get confusing for them too, because I have a whole bunch of, we're talking about JAMstack and WordPress instead of interviewing you, but
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, it's all good. It's a natural thing to fall into because it's something we have in common, but yeah. I've got a bunch of, what do they call them? Custom post types in WordPress. And so, yeah, the setup is different from anything that any of them have ever seen before. And so it's like, okay, you have to go do it this way. And anything new, I have to go set up. And if I'm going to do that, I'd rather just write freaking HTML.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what you're outputting in the end anyway, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm toying with the idea of making them learn markup or markdown. Sorry.
Yeah.
But we'll see. But markdown's not that complicated. So
it's funny. Some people seem to really dig their heels in and not want to learn markdown, and then other people just absolutely adore it. I remember talking to some friends of mine who worked on the Gov UK project over in the UK, which is like a big, like, this flagship piece of work by the government, which is never a body of people you expect to be doing really innovative technical. This really kind of blazed the trail for, really architecting sensible, like, technology stacks for big projects like this. And they had like thousands and thousands of civil servants who were content managers who were used to editing pages with, Word document templates, and that's what they knew, and they were never going to want to change to something else. And then they introduced Markdown as the tool that they would use. And after a small kind of learning curve, the editors loved it. Their content authorship went up through the roof just because it's simpler and it's like a very constrained set of rules, and it turned out to be really productive for them. So I don't know if thousands and thousands of civil servants who are maybe of a particular age and mindset can adopt Markdown and be productive, that kind of gives me hope for the rest of us.
Yeah, there are a number of jokes here in the U.S. about government workers.
Right, I'm sure.
Their mental capacity. So yeah, I get where you're coming from, and yeah, not all government workers are mentally deficient, but the government doesn't always have a high standard. We'll just put it that way.
It's I think for me, it's more like there are lots and lots and lots of people working on these giant projects, and that's a ship that's very slow to steer. So
there's a ton of bureaucracy that they have to work through for everything.
Yeah, it's difficult. Yeah.
But anyway, so it's definitely interesting. And I've found a few, WYSIWYG editors that translate stuff over to Markdown. So I may just say, look, it has to go in Markdown, but I don't care how you get there. So if you want to use this other tool, do it.
Right.
But anyway.
There's options.
All right. Well, I'm going to veer us into talking about Phil and less about JAMstack. So
okay.
Anyway, do you want to just give a brief introduction? I mean, we've kind of talked about Netlify and what you do there, but is there anything else that folks should know about you?
Yeah, well, so I mean, maybe my tiny backstory is that I've been developing stuff for the web for about almost exactly 20 years now. I've been at Netlify for about 18 months, but prior to that, I was working in agencies. So I did about 9 years working at agencies on like projects of different flavors and different sizes for all kinds of different brands, public and private sector. And before that, I was working all kinds of different software places. I worked at British Telecom for a while doing open source innovation there. But I cut my teeth. My first job was putting numbers on screens for traders to trade off. So kind of real-time market data over the web. And at that point, there were no WebSockets. There was no long polling. There was no Ajax. There was nothing that made it easy to put real-time data on screens for traders to trade off. So it was things like Java applets and all kinds of shenanigans. But I was doing web development, doing kind of front-end development, trying to build UIs that kind of sat in front of these kind of Java applets to make user interfaces. So it was very challenging, but it was loads of fun. And it felt like it was doing work at a time where the JavaScript landscape was changing really quickly. Lots to learn and lots of new toys came along. But I'll be honest, I wish WebSockets were a thing when I was doing that. It would have changed my life completely.
Yeah. How did you get into programming?
Well, I mean, I I kind of formally got into it in a gap year, really. You know, I originally was studying civil engineering and hating it, really doing very badly in my university career. And I said gap year, it was like an industrial placement year where I had the very exotic life of living in like a porter cabin, like a shack under a motorway. with
wow.
Well, yeah, it was very, very exotic. But the place that I'd found to live, it was like a shared flat. And the guys I just kind of happened to be, you know, sharing with, they were both studying computer science. And I'd always been kind of interested. And so I got talking to them more and more and got more interested in it, and ended up changing course and changing university so that I would go and study computer science. So that's when I kind of formally got into it. But years before then, I'd always been dabbling around. You know, I used to have a Sinclair Spectrum, you know, back in the day, that I would, you know, buy the magazine for and painstakingly copy line by line the program for some kind of crummy game that I would end up recording onto a cassette, and and then it would fail and all those kind of things. And even did like my at school, I did my arts coursework on a computer. You know, I programmed kind of things to reproduce artwork and stuff like that. So I was always dabbling, you know, since I was kind of young. But it was only really when I had a bit of a change of direction when I was at university that I got into it more formally. And you know, that was a bit of a change of direction for me, just because I found it really interesting. And so I went off and started studying computer science, which, to be honest, I didn't do brilliantly at. I found it hard to study computer science, found it really tricky. But along the way, not part of the course, this was kind of early to mid 90s. You know, the web wasn't part of the curriculum at all, but, you know, someone started showing me this magical thing called HTML, where I didn't have to compile it and I didn't have to do any of these other things. I didn't have this complex environment to work on. I would edit a text file and save it and hit refresh in my browser and see the result. And that was kind of magical to me. So that's where I kind of embarked on a life of making things for the web and just learning more about it and loving the kind of the immediacy of it. So that's how I really feel like I got started.
Awesome. So then you graduated, and you went and got your first job in web development?
Yeah, so that's when I went and got my first job at a software house that did this kind of market data work. So yeah, putting numbers on screens for traders. But it wasn't the first job offer I got. The first job offer I got after graduating with a computer science degree, moving down to London, you know, getting somewhere to live, and then like, okay, crumbs, I've got a few weeks until my next rent is due and I don't have a job yet. So I was applying for work. And the first job offer I got was actually from an IT kind of recruitment consultancy that I'd signed up for. And the first job they offered me was driving a van that had computers in it.
Not exactly a computer.
Not quite what I had in mind, if I'm honest. But it was, you know, there was some pressure that, you know, I'm going to have to make rent in a few weeks. So I didn't dismiss it out of hand, but thankfully I did dismiss it. And then I got myself this job working for this market data kind of company. And that's where I started to really learn about the web a lot more. That's where I started to build things with JavaScript, you know, a bit more formally. You know, I'd been using it for image swaps, a few bits and pieces like that before, and a few bits of DHTML back in those glorious days of really
DHTML,
brute forcing things around the screen with JavaScript, and it was clumsy, but it was fun. But yeah, that's where I kind of started. But yeah, once I joined this company, I was just learning a lot more about how HTTP worked and about, you know, what the kind of constraints there are in browsers and those kind of things. And that's where I really started learning a lot faster, I think, once I'd got into some practical, you know, applications of what I'd learned before.
Yeah, well, back in the day too, the HTML and how that all worked, that was much more interesting in my opinion than the front end, because the front end, it was, you could kind of nudge things around. You know, we finally got the DOM, and that made things a lot easier, and jQuery or Prototype, and that made things a lot easier. But yeah, I mean, back in the day, JavaScript was just a way of, you know, making your web page kind of play nice, I guess.
Yeah, right. Yeah, just trying to add some kind of interactivity or something that felt slightly dynamic in the front end.
Yeah.
I actually remember being like more excited than I should have been by an effect I saw on Alta Vista, if you remember that back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
The old. I was going to say a search engine, but actually it wasn't. It was a portal, I guess, wasn't it? Just tons of links all over the site. And it was the thing that fascinated me was the hover effect on links, which I'd never seen before. Like a long list of links, just running my cursor up and down the page, seeing it change under the cursor. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how that suddenly felt like, oh, this is something you can really interact with and really kind of engage with. And it was a tiny, tiny thing. Of course, it's just a hover state in CSS, but seeing that for the first time was super interesting, and it kind of sparked my imagination a little bit. It's funny how small the seeds are that can kind of grow into something a lot bigger. But that was kind of interesting to me.
So when was it that things clicked at all where you were thinking, okay, this JavaScript thing is a thing?
Let's see. I mean, I think it would have been probably a few jobs in where, I'd been building stuff for the web, but it was around the kind of dawn of Ajax, around that kind of time, where I changed job and I ended up working for a company that was actually later got bought by VMware, and they were building a web-based application that it was managing lots of servers in the background, but it had a web front end, and that was probably the first touch I've had on something that I would really describe as a web application. And it was built with JavaScript, and there was lots of interactivity, and it had a team who were building an API in the back end that was like built on top of Java, but it was a RESTful API. And that was my first chance really working in a team where there was this kind of logical separation of an API layer and a front end. And I guess it was around the time that I suppose Prototype would have been coming out as well, just shortly before jQuery. So we were doing things like, just building ourselves JavaScript utilities to help normalize some of the differences in the browsers, the kind of things that we just take for granted now when, jQuery came along and just like flattened out the landscape for all of the different browsers. And just, we kind of poke fun a little bit sometimes at jQuery now, but it was just so groundbreaking, and it's such an enabler for all kinds of developers. I mean, I would have hated to have not had jQuery along the way. It's just so the profound difference it made is just huge, I think.
Oh yeah, all the headaches of this works in this browser but not that browser, or right. Oh, there's this special function, and Internet Explorer was the worst at that, right? They all had their little quirks in it, and jQuery just took care of all of that for you. Yeah,
exactly. So I have a lot of affection for jQuery and the path it kind of made for us all to follow. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to kind of overlook that now that browsers are doing a better job of normalizing some of their APIs, and some of the things that we had to depend on libraries for, now we can do directly, and
the framework smooth over some of that too.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's weird how now we're starting to get so much more used to using frameworks and using kind of big build kind of environments to create these things, that we forget that some of the browsers have become much more powerful to use directly as well. I mean, I know people like Chris Ferdinandi are often talking about using vanilla JavaScript and doing things directly, and it's so much more possible to do that now. It's absolutely the case that you don't have to drop in a big library or framework to do a lot of things. We often do just because it's convenient and it feels like it's the hammer we've become used to, but we don't always need to do that. So I don't know. I think maybe it's some of my slightly older roots in building stuff for the web that I sometimes think of myself as a bit of a web hippie, and a bit of a bit risk averse, a bit cautious, and like to try and write as few lines of JavaScript as possible. I like to ship as little code as I possibly can, but I still consider myself, a JavaScript fan. But I'm really cautious.
I think I'm going to make you a shirt that says Phil Hawksworth, web hippie.
Sold. I will wear it with pride.
So I love it though. So I'm curious. I mean, we had you on to talk about JAMstack. And what's interesting is that sometimes JAMstack includes a framework and sometimes it doesn't, which, is kind of the argument that I feel like we have off and on JavaScript Jabber regarding what JavaScript is. And I'm curious, A, how did you get into JAMstack? And then B, how do you envision people actually working with it, in the current state of where JavaScript is?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason I got into it was back when I was working at agencies, working with often kind of big brands that would have, they've invested millions, tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars over the years on their infrastructure. Big kind of, I'm doing the air quotes, enterprise grades, infrastructure. But ultimately it's for websites. And it was really difficult to build stuff on those stacks. Often it would take a really long time to either get environments provisioned or go through deployment processes, all of those kind of things. And very often the kind of things that we were designing and actually implementing, realistically, they had lots of interactivity in the front end, but very often they were effectively, what we would consider to be static websites. They're statically hosted. They didn't need to perform any logic at request time on a server. Right. They needed to get stuff into the browser as fast as possible and do things with it there. So I became quite enthusiastic about finding efficient ways to build things statically. Got really into static site generators, was a huge fan of Jekyll, as I still am, and just found efficient ways of effectively building HTML, building websites, and then hosting them statically. And so, when on occasions that I could do that, we found that we could drastically reduce the time to market, reduce the costs, reduce some of the uncertainty, because my role was, as a technical director, I was often the person who would be asked, okay, how much is this infrastructure going to cost to build this thing for us? And it's like, okay, well, we've got a lot of servers we might need to factor in, a lot of different architecture we might need to think about. And there's always this kind of line on a form that we'd be having to fill in. It's like expected users per month. And it's like, I don't know. It's somewhere between none if it's a disaster. And, this was a multiplier that would, impact how many servers, how we'd architect it, how much it was going to cost, and all those kind of things. So I got quite enamored with this process of this approach of saying, we're going to take a ton of this infrastructure out and we'll just serve it statically from a CDN directly. And then it's built to scale by default. It's impervious to all of these kind of security hacks that we might be scared of for our other infrastructure. So many of these things just kind of got simplified out just because they just weren't a factor anymore. Yep. So that became quite a successful approach for the projects I was working on, and I got really excited about that. And kind of along the way, I'd be calling out different services that could help with that. I mean, I was very enthusiastic about GitHub pages. Very enthusiastic about Surge. I don't know if you've come across Surge, which is another kind of static hosting service where you install an npm package and then you can run a command and it deploys to their infrastructure. And I got excited about Netlify, which is a kind of similar thing, and which is where I work now. And so by occasionally going and doing talks about this before I joined Netlify, kind of Netlify spotted me and like, oh, thanks for the name check, and cut to the end of the story, and that's where I work now. So it's weird because I used to be going on about this approach long before I joined Netlify, but now I'm there. I have to be a bit more cautious about how I talk about it, because I guess people will think, well, you're going to be enthusiastic about this kind of approach because that's where you work, but actually the inverse is true. Right. So yeah, that's how I found my way there. But when you're kind of your original question about how people might use JAMstack and what really that is, I think for me the biggest attribute of a JAMstack site is that it can be served directly from a CDN with no origin. It's kind of a bit confusing, the fact that the letter J is right there at the front of JAMstack and standing for JavaScript, because there's this suggestion that, every site then has to be built with JavaScript. Right. And in actual fact, it can be embellished with JavaScript or progressively enhanced with JavaScript, but it doesn't need to be served or rendered with JavaScript. it's a really powerful way of doing more with our sites than we might ever have thought possible, because the browser APIs are richer and we can interact with them with JavaScript, or external APIs are available for us to interact with JavaScript. But for me, a JAMstack site is something that's pre-rendered as much as possible and served in the simplest way possible without an origin server directly from a CDN. That's the crux of it for me. That's
awesome. And that's an interesting way of thinking about it, because I hadn't thought about it from the CDN angle, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because that's the thing that just elevates these sites to new possibilities for me. The fact that you don't need to maintain an origin server. All of this logic can run, and you have to keep breathing the entire time. I've worked in quite a few projects back in my agency days where this architecture wasn't available to me. It's like, well, we've invested this money, so you better well use it.
Yeah.
And then you end up saying, okay, well, it's doing okay, but we're worried about scaling it. Mm-hmm. We're worried about the performance. And so, okay, well, we've paid for a big expensive CDN to sit in front of it. So just configure the assets in and out of the CDN, figure out what's cached, what's not, how things are going to be a cache hit, what's going to be a miss. So, this is hard. It's hard to do. So if you can take that complexity away and just say everything of this site is served from the CDN,
yep,
it just simplifies the headaches of managing the infrastructure.
No, that makes sense. So what's been your favorite thing that you've done with JavaScript or JAMstack? What's the thing you're most proud of or excited to talk about?
Whoa, I mean, that's a tough one, because I get excited both by kind of simplicity and something that's really simple and elegant, or by something that's kind of wacky and out there, or pushing the envelope. And there's just complete opposite ends of the spectrum. I mean, I'm still really, really proud of that clunky old web application that I mentioned right back at the beginning, that was effectively a JavaScript app that I was building to manage servers and infrastructure and things in the background, just because I had to invent so much of it from first principles, and make lots of mistakes along the way and build out my own kind of libraries and those kind of things. But I really was excited about discovering this kind of decoupled architecture at the time, about building things that talk to APIs. So I'm still really proud of that work. I'm not so proud that I'd like to see it shipped and in production somewhere at the moment. I think it's confined to like a happy memory that might not live on in the best way. But in a weird sense, it has a lot in common with something I have a kind of peripheral contact with at the moment, which is Netlify's admin UI. That effectively is the same thing. It's a web application which is talking to a bunch of APIs to configure infrastructure. And I hadn't really thought about it until you just asked me, but I guess these are kind of the same thing. It's just that this one is built in React, and it benefits from all of the improvements and capabilities of browsers and of modern JavaScript frameworks like React.
Right.
But it's still building on this same architectural model of, something happening in the front end and talking to decoupled APIs. And I'm kind of proud of that as well, because I think it's kind of its simplicity kind of belies the complexity that's behind it, which I really like. So those are both kind of complex things. But I love silly things as well. I built a silly example, which is a comments engine, which is built on the JAMstack. And that's like some forms and some APIs and some hooks and some automation. And I'm kind of proud of that, because it's a silly little example, but it works really nicely. And it's just one of those things that when you start putting different Lego blocks together in interesting ways, you can do all kinds of fun things. And I really like that. I like piecing the different pieces together to make something new. So I'm kind of pleased with that.
Nice. So what are you working on these days?
Well, there's, I'm busy off talking at conferences and doing things for Netlify, and also just talking about JAMstack a lot. But we're also doing a lot of work on some of the tooling at Netlify. We recently launched Netlify Dev, which is this.
I love Netlify Dev.
Yay! There we are. There's a convert right away. I love that. And I mean, Netlify Dev is one of those things that one of our founders, Matt Billman, he's one of these people who can you never want him to get on a long flight, because when he gets off the flight at the other end, he's had some ideas and he's made some prototypes. Just make this thing. We're like, oh, okay, all right, let's see, and it just turns out to be something mind blowing. And I think that's kind of what happened with Netlify Dev. He's like, okay, well, we can build this tooling, and let's look at this, and then of course it needs to be productized and turned into something that we can ship.
Right.
But it's great. The thing I love about it is that it fills this gap for me. You know, I got into static websites because I loved the fact that you could run a build locally. You could get some assets that you could look at on your local server, and you can say with confidence, this is what it's going to be like if I pick these assets up and I stick them on some kind of simple web host somewhere, you know, whether that's hosted from Dropbox or from S3 or from, you know, from wherever, it's going to be the same. So I loved that. And so I was really enjoying that process. But then Netlify came along and they kind of automated a bunch of these things. Great. That's all fine. The same thing's still true. But then when you start to add some other intelligence in, like CDN nodes that you can configure to do redirects, you know, and have redirect rules and
right,
those kind of things. Super powerful, but your thing is, how do you replicate that locally? How do you do the same thing locally? And Netlify Dev comes along and it does exactly that. It means that, you know, the exact same CDN logic that runs on our edge nodes, you know, that's compiled down using WebAssembly and runs locally on your environment, so you can have exactly the same experience locally as you can when it's deployed to production. So it kind of smooths out those gaps again. So there's a lot of work going on on building that out and kind of building demos to show how it works and documenting it and all of that good stuff that makes it go from an idea that someone had on a plane to something that can be shipped and can be really useful.
Yeah, and see, for me, I don't have any of the CDN redirects or anything, but for me, the kicker was that if I just loaded it out of my own file system, then any of the references that had a root reference, so /something else, wouldn't work. And so my CSS and JavaScript wouldn't load properly. I'd have to fiddle with it. So then I'd go install some HTTP server, and I could never remember exactly what it was that I put on there and then how to run it. And so Netlify Dev just kind of goes, oh, here you go.
Yeah, it does. It kind of gets progressively smarter because, if you've just got some assets, it will say, oh, I'll spin you up a little static server so that it'll, all of your paths work correctly, because it's as if it's a server rather than a file system. But the other nice thing is, if it does spot that you're using a build tool, if you're using like Gulp or Grunt or something like that, or if you're using a static site generator that comes with its own build tool, it'll spin that up for you as well and then sit as a layer in front of it. So it kind of gives you this kind of sugar across the top. And that's really nice because it doesn't just add things like the redirects, but it also adds support for things like centrally managed environment variables. So you can configure environment variables up in like Netlify admin so that when your build runs, it picks those things up and uses them.
Right.
But then typically what people will do is they'll use something like .env, locally, which kind of allows them to define those variables locally in a .env file, which they hopefully will remember not to commit to version control. So but this takes that away, because now if you run Netlify Dev, it'll grab the environment variables from your project and inject those into your build as it runs. So you can just manage them in one place, and then it kind of quietly just uses those locally as well. So there's a bunch of different tools that it adds. And the one that I should probably give the team the big shout out for is the pipeline for building serverless functions. That is just really cool. Because all of the stuff that I think Divya and I probably kind of banged on about a little bit back when we were on before, talking about like the deployment processes and the kind of workflow that Netlify gives you. It now does that for functions as well. So if you're running Lambda functions, you're building Lambda functions, Netlify Dev will give you this way of just bootstrapping these functions. It'll even give you like boilerplate different examples of functions that you can then iterate. And when you deploy your site, that quietly in the background deploys them off to AWS Lambda, sets up all your API gateway, all of that stuff, and then just gives you a URL which is relative to your root of your project where these functions now live. And I don't know, I was always excited about being able to do that stuff in the past, but now it's within my reach. I'm always going to be rubbish at doing something like managing AWS, but I can manage this now through these tools. So yeah, there's a lot of work going on around that part of the kind of tool chain, which I'm pretty excited about right now.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff too. I don't want to fiddle with that stuff. I just want to write the code and then know that it's going to get run at the right time with the right data.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's super nice. And I've used like the serverless framework and things like that, and to get around some of that. But yeah, setting it up on my own, like logging into the interface that the Amazon folks have put together for Lambda, that's just it makes me hurt. It's so hard.
It's like hard.
It shouldn't be this hard. But
yeah, and that in fairness, it's really complex stuff. There's a lot going on there, and it's very clever. But I think things like that really make me appreciate good UI design and really kind of care there to just shield you from the hurt. Because
the right level of abstraction. Here are all the things that we think you might care about.
Right.
All the rest of it.
Yeah. So it's I don't know. It's very difficult to get that stuff right. But yeah, this seems to be a nice workflow at the moment. I'm having a lot of fun building things with it, and it's one of the kind of perks of the job that I've got, that I get to play with these tools and then say, oh, here's an idea. Could we make an Instagram clone or this or that, or who knows? And then go off and play and see if you can experiment and pull those tools together and make something, and then talk about it. So that's a lot of fun. I'm a bit of a kid in a candy store sometimes.
Yep, absolutely. So one other question I have for you is, what does a day in the life of Phil Hawksworth look like? Not just work, but like you get up in the morning and you do X, Y, Z all the way till you go to bed. Oh,
a typical day. That's kind of tricky. I have a feeling that if you ask anyone who works in developer relations what a typical day looks like, they'll pull a face and go, oh, I don't know what a typical day really is. Because, I spend quite a lot of time traveling for conferences and things like that, or, going backwards and forwards, which I really enjoy. But I also really enjoy the days where I get to just work at home. So I work remotely. I'm based here just outside London. Half of the company is over in San Francisco, and the rest of us are dotted around. So I'm a lot of my team are 8 hours behind me, which, as someone who has come from working in an environment where it was like very meeting heavy and didn't get a lot of thinking time, it's a huge luxury for me. So I find that it's very easy to spring out of bed and want to get straight into work. So my first challenge of every day is not just to open up my email or check Slack or check Twitter to see what's been going on and just kind of accidentally crossfade from being in bed into being at work. I'm very strict about making sure I kind of go out for a little run or have some breakfast and kind of get up and start my day properly. That's the tricky discipline. But then once I get into it, I spend a lot of time reading what people have been talking about, posting about on Twitter related to kind of JAMstack and just web development in general, seeing what's kind of good to kind of jump on the back of and either contribute to or kind of take into consideration, kind of catch up with the conversations that have been going on about the product, about the Netlify platform and the kind of product team, see what they've been all talking about. And then very often I'll start trying to build something out. Often I don't know about you, but I have all my good ideas in the shower. I don't know if, am I oversharing by saying that? I don't know. I have a lot of good ideas in the shower. I'm like, I want to make this thing. So often I'll be trying to kind of dabble and make a little experiment when I start. And then hopefully that'll be something that will become interesting that I can then talk about, maybe write a talk about or a blog post about. So I spend a lot of time kind of doing those kind of things, which is a lot of fun, if I'm honest, after, again, being once upon a time in an environment where it was meetings from dawn till dusk. So hopefully I'll be able to have enough kind of headroom in my day before people wake up West Coast, and then I start collaborating with that team and kind of coordinating a little bit. So it's very rare that 2 days are exactly alike, but that's a kind of a nice day for me there.
Nice. And, are you married? Do you have kids that you chase around or anything like that?
So I'm married, but there are no kids around. There are two cats around who both like to help with the keyboard. Usually if I'm on Twitter or on Slack, something, where any mistype will be communicated immediately, that's when they like to get involved and help out. But no, it's other than them, it's just my wife and I. So that kind of makes it a little bit easier for when I'm traveling around to lots of conferences. When I get back, I'm not handed a baby like a lot of my colleagues are, which means that when they get back, they've still got quite a lot of work to do. I'm very fortunate; I can kind of sit on the sofa and take a big deep breath once I get back from a busy conference.
Yep. Yeah, I know how the other end works. I mean, my youngest is 3 now, so they just all kind of climb on me. But
right, yeah, yeah. So that's wonderful. But there's no getting back from a trip and saying, "Oh, I'm tired. That was a long trip. I'm just going to sit quietly." So no, you're on duty now.
Oh, you could do that. You just get the look,
and rightly so.
Very cool. Yeah. All right. So the last thing that we do is picks. Do you have some things you want to shout out about on the show?
Oh, crumbs. I don't know. I'm not prepared. For picks. Let's think.
That's fine. Okay. I can jump in with picks.
You go first while I think.
So one thing that I've been working on, and this kind of came out of, I hate it. I don't want to ramble, but I'm going to ramble. So this kind of came out of writing the Get a Coder Job book, which I have now retitled to Find Your Developer Dream Job. And it's because I started writing it for new people, and then I had a whole bunch of people who had like maybe their first year or two's worth of jobs in development, and then they're like, these are all the things I hate about this job. I don't know how to find a job that gives me what I want. And I'm like, well, I wrote that book for the beginner people, but it's just as applicable to you because it's the same process, right? Here's how you figure out what you want from your job, and then here's how you find a job that's going to give it to you.
Yeah.
So I put that together, and I'd been working off and on a video course to go with it. And so I'm probably going to publish that next. But I was putting it together, and as I was talking to people for the book, I had a whole bunch of people come to me, and essentially they were saying, look, you keep telling me that the big thing I need to do is go get involved in a JavaScript community or a Ruby community or whatever community, right? Mm-hmm. And there's nothing near me. And of course, then I go and I'm like, okay, what's your zip code? And we're looking for JavaScript groups, right? And then I'll find them a group near them on meetup.com. Mm-hmm. And about half of the people I was able to do that just right out of hand. It's like, is this close to you? Yeah, that's 20 minutes away. Okay, that's close enough. You can make it to that, right?
Nice.
But then I'd find out, some of these folks, like they had kids that had baseball games those evenings, or other folks just lived in areas where they really didn't have a community, right? And it's like, well, I could go set something up, but I'm going to get like 2 people who do PHP and a couple of us that have gone through Free Code Camp, and and so it's not really a community that, I can learn some things from them, but that's not what I'm going to be getting out of it. I'm going to be getting out of, I'm going to get relationships and general principles of programming. And I want something that's a little more focused that's going to help me learn React or Angular or whatever.
Right.
So I was like, okay, well, there's got to be a way to do this. And I did remote conferences for a couple of years, actually. And I'm finding out now, talking to people, that I should have kept doing them because people want those a lot more now than they did 3 or 4 years ago when I was doing it.
Yeah.
So I'm probably going to start those up too. Hint, hint, keep an eye out. But in the meantime, I'm like, I need to build this community for these people, right? I need to put something out there, because I hate being one of those people that says somebody ought to, because somebody ought to means nobody's going to.
Right.
And so I'm putting it together. I currently am just putting together a wait list because I don't want to launch it until I have enough people to make a go of it. But if you go to, and Phil, you can't go there yet because I haven't actually put the website up completely yet. Everywherejs.com.
Sorry, I spoke over it. Say it again.
Everywherejs.com. Because here we have like Utah.js and other places they have, we are here JS, wherever they are.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, this is kind of everywhere. So everywhere.js.
I like it.
The idea is that I will bring in people from the wider JavaScript community. So it might be Phil. Or I might wind up getting, we've had Brendan Ike, for example, on the show. I'm not making any promises, but we're going to try and get him to come in, right, and talk about JavaScript, or, people that you want to hear from that are going to help you, maybe learn some of the history of JavaScript, or learn what you need to know to stay current, or, hey, JAMstack's a different way of thinking about your JavaScript, right? And so it's going to be kind of like JavaScript Jabber, except it's going to be interactive. It's going to be an actual talk. And then we're going to do our roundtable chat afterward. And so even if we have like 100 people, if you raise your hand and you want to join in the conversation, we'll just rotate people through, and we'll give people a chance to introduce themselves and talk about what they're doing, and put their information out there so that if they want to get together with other people from the community, they can. And then we'll put together a forum and a Slack room and just give people space where they can come and say, I want to stay current. That's the thing that I was here, is stay current. And so you can check all that out. In fact, it's all going to be hosted. I'm also putting together an Everywhere Ruby, Everywhere RB.
Right. Nice.
And all of this is going to be at keepcurrentacademy.com. So if you want to know where all of it is, it's keepcurrentacademy.com. And yeah, Everywhere JS is going to be at everywherejs.com. And that'll take you directly to where you need to go to put in your information for the wait list. And then keep an eye.
It sounds like a load of content, a load of things.
Well, I mean, a lot of it depends on having people interact, and so that's why I'm saying I'm going to wait until I have enough of a community to where we can jump in and then have the conversation. Okay, what do you want to learn? Who do you want to hear from? And then make those people part of our community too. And yeah, I found that when I go out and like try and start a Slack channel, if I'm like, hey, we have a Slack, then I'll have 10 people join, then I'll have 5 people join. And so the conversation kind of comes and goes and fits and starts. And so I want to have a couple hundred people in when we start so that we can just immediately start having these conversations and everybody's there at the same time. And that way the conversations can continue on their own. And, I'll be there and I'll be asking questions because I want to know what people are thinking. But I also want people to interact and have that kind of interaction there. So
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing.
Cool. Well, I've thought of a pick as well.
All right.
You gave me just a tiny bit of breathing room so I could think of a pick. So can I pick a person? Is that
yes?
Is that cool?
Yes.
So I saw a talk just this morning. I watched it on someone sent me a link on Twitter, and it was a talk at the conference. You Gotta Love Front End. It was talked by Rich Harris, who's the creator of Svelte. This kind of rather beautiful.
Svelte is fascinating.
It's really lovely, isn't it? And as I'm starting to really appreciate more and more Svelte and starting to get into it a little bit more. Very interesting looking framework that seems like it's learned the lessons that it's observed from other frameworks such as React and Vue. Very, very interesting. But the thing that I want to call out as a pick isn't Svelte itself. It's actually the talk by Rich Harris that I saw a video of from You Gotta Love Front End. And he did a talk called Rethinking Reactivity, which kind of talks about, what reactivity is, how that's been implemented in React, what's good about it, where its limitations are, kind of inspiration that comes from how discoverable reactivity is right within spreadsheets. And then talks about the fundamentals of how that's been implemented in Svelte and talks about a few other things. I found the content really good, but I just also thought the delivery was really brilliant. So I was kind of raving about this talk after I just watched it, just on YouTube after the event, which was, I think, last week. So my pick there is Rich Harris's talk, Rethinking Reactivity.
Awesome. All right, Phil, real quick, I only have 1 minute and then I have another call.
Okay.
Where do people find you online?
Okay, so you can either go to my website, which is hawksworks.com, HAWKSWORX.com, because I was trying to be cool once upon a time. Or you can find me on Twitter at Phil Hawksworth. Both of those places are places you can find me. Or there's one other place which is a cool place to find me. There is one Slack community which seems to be really, really growing for the JAMstack community, and that's run by Bud Parr in New York. And it's the New Dynamic. So I would definitely recommend going to the newdynamic.org, and then from there finding your way to the Slack. community that's in there. If you're at all interested in talking about JAMstack and things to do with kind of statically hosted sites and that kind of stuff, lots of interesting conversation going on in there.
Nice. That's awesome. All right, Phil. Well, it was great talking, and it was fun catching up.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much for having me, Chuck. It was great fun.
Thanks, you too. We'll wrap this one up, folks, and we will catch you all next week. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.